When I got that positive pregnancy test, I almost choked. Peter and I had only been married a few months and hadn't planned on kids for at least a couple more years. I was on the pill. I decided to go to the doctor and find out for sure before telling Peter. The doctor took a urine sample and confirmed I was definitely pregnant. I looked at the doctor. "But I'm on the pill," I said. Dazed. Bewildered. She simply shrugged and said, "It happens." When I told Peter the news, his reaction surprised me. After a brief look of surprise, his lips spread into a smile. "I'm going to be a dad," he said in amazement. He was happy, and that made me happy. For the first time, I put my hands on my belly and felt relief and happiness instead of panic and confusion. Peter started to laugh, a big joyous laugh, before grabbing my hands. I started laughing too, and we danced around the room, feeling more in love than ever. The pregnancy was not what I thought it would be like. I never had morning sickness. My stomach didn't grow quickly even by my third trimester, you could only barely make out the bump. I looked like I had eaten a big meal, not like I was weeks away from giving birth. My friends who had kids would go on and on about how lucky I was to have such an easy pregnancy, but it made me feel disconnected. I would forget I was even pregnant sometimes. The doctor threw around scary words like low birth weight and low amniotic fluid levels without ever really telling me what it might mean. Every ultrasound looked normal, though, so I just assumed I would have a small but healthy baby. When one of the ultrasounds revealed that we would be having a girl, I thought Peter might cry from happiness. We decided to name her Violet Rose, after my favorite flower and his. Violet arrived on her due date. The labor went exactly as I had read it would, no complications whatsoever, though she was, as expected, on the small side. She was a perfect little girl. Right from the start, though, she was a little odd. As soon as she was placed on her back with her arms free, her hands started doing the strangest things. They moved endlessly, her fingers with a dexterity and preciseness that seemed unnatural in a newborn baby. The doctors and nurses were perplexed and amazed, but simply shrugged it off as an interesting but harmless quirk. The movements never stopped. It looked almost like she was doing sign language, but they weren't any signs that I recognized. They didn't stop when she slept. We tried swaddling her, but she just broke out and continued her strange movements. She was off in other ways too. She rarely cried, and she required very little sleep. Peter and I both tried so hard to bond with her, but she didn't want to be held or cuddled or play peekaboo. She was perfectly content to lay in her crib all the time, always speaking her silent language with her hands. I called pediatricians, child behavioral specialists, other people with kids, hoping for some insight on why my baby was so different from others, but was always met with shrugs and bewilderment. No one had ever seen a baby like Violet, and no one had any answers. When Violet was around 10 months old, things took a turn for the weirder. One night, around 2 a.m., I was woken by strange sounds from the baby monitor. Over and over. I rubbed my eyes and listened carefully, still half asleep. It was quiet, so quiet, I wasn't surprised to see Peter sleeping right through it. At first I thought it was just weird feedback on the monitor, but the more I listened, it didn't sound like feedback. It sounded human. Gibberish, but human. I rolled out of bed and grabbed the monitor to look at the camera, which we had never needed, since Violet never cried or really did anything but her sign language, but always turned on at night just in case. "Peter!" I screamed. He jumped out of bed in a sleepy panic and said, "What's wrong?" I couldn't say anything. Instead, I just pointed at the baby monitor. There it was. The strange figure. It looked almost human, but also, it didn't. First of all, it was way too tall. Its head was just inches from touching the ceiling, and it was way too skinny. Its arms hung down below its knees, with long thin fingers that moved incessantly, quickly, and deliberately. Violet stood in her crib, mimicking the creature's hand movements. Peter took one look and, his face drained of color, sprinted towards the nursery. I grabbed my pepper spray from the closet and ran after him. When we got to Violet's room, there was nothing there. Nothing but a crib, a rocking chair, books and untouched toys, and Violet, laying there, staring at us with large, empty eyes and moving her hands. Peter flipped on the light and looked around wildly, threw open the closet and dropped to his knees to look under the crib. Nothing. He stared at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. I stared helplessly back and asked, "Should we call the police?" He shook his head incredulously and shot back, "And say what? That there was a monster in our kid's room, but that it disappeared?" I agreed that it sounded nuts, but we decided to call anyways. We simply told the police we saw someone in our daughter's room through the baby monitor camera, but they'd gotten away before we got there. They came and investigated but found no signs of a break-in, nothing missing or damaged, and all the doors and windows secured. They took our statements, but we all knew there was nothing they could or would do. We decided the best course of action was to move the crib into our bedroom and contact a child psychologist. The psychologist said they typically do not see children that young and to wait a few years. I pleaded, told them we were desperate, but to no avail. I was terrified to go to sleep that night. Violet was asleep in the crib next to our bed, but Peter and I were both wide awake, both looking around nervously and jumping at every minor noise. "Peter? What if it comes back?" He looked at me and reached under his pillow. When he pulled out a handgun, I sighed with relief. I was doubtful that my pepper spray was going to cut it. At some point, both Peter and I must have drifted off. I woke to the sun shining through the gaps in my blinds, shining directly on an empty space where the crib and Violet had been. We searched the whole house, then we called the police. They came and asked us questions. Once again they searched the house, and once again they said they saw no signs of breaking and entering. When they asked for a photo of Violet, we both pulled out our phones. Every photo either of us had taken with Violet in it was gone. Not only were they no longer on our phones, but they were no longer on Facebook or Instagram either. I asked my mom to text me a photo she had taken of me and Violet last time she had visited. She replied back, "Hi sweetie, who is Violet?" At this point, the police left, saying they would be in touch. One of them gave me a pitying look as he closed our door behind himself. Peter and I just looked at each other, both at a complete loss for words. Everything was gone. Her birth certificate. Every photo. Every medical document. Every memory from everyone who knew her, except me and Peter. Oh, Peter. He has a fire in his eyes. He wants to find her, believes she is in danger, thinks we need to rescue her. He's a good father. But I'm not so sure. I know I must be the worst mother in the world for having these thoughts, but I'm not sure I want to look for her. I think she went willingly. I don't think she's in danger, I think she is the danger. Most of all, I think that since the beginning, she has been silently communicating through her weird hand movements with that thing that was in her room. And despite the fact that I carried her in my womb, I don't think she was ever my daughter.